Good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Bingen. I'm the director of the Aerospace Security Project here at CSIS. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I want to thank you for your flexibility this morning. There was a key vote in the Senate Armed Services Committee this morning, so we appreciate Senator Ernst, Senator Kelly, and Congressman Ryan for adjusting their schedules so that they could still join us for the discussion this morning. It's a privilege to have them with us today. Our national defense and military have long enjoyed bipartisan support. Each of these members here today served their country in uniform and continue to serve our nation to strengthen our national security. Building on the fantastic first panel that we had this morning, we're eager to get these congressional perspectives on defense modernization and innovation, the urgency of action, from their roles on the Armed Services Committees. Senator Ernst's Innovation Act, Senator Kelly and Congressman Ryan's roles in chairing the Defense Modernization Caucus in their respective chambers. So I'm going to hand over to an old friend, Roger Zakheim. We were both staffers on the House Armed Services Committee together. He is now the Washington director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute and the mastermind behind the terrific Reagan National Defense Forum held every year in Simi Valley. So Roger, I'm going to turn the stage over to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think we'll just get started given the time, and nobody really wants to hear from me anyway. We have the senator and the congressman here. Thank you, Carrie, for that kind introduction, and Seth and Dr. Hamry for giving me this opportunity to talk about defense modernization with two leaders from the Hill that care deeply about this issue. Not only do they care about it, they work on it. And the two members here, along with Senator Kelly, who will join us when he gets here from the Senate, are all leading the Defense Modernization Caucus. And I thought maybe we could start out with you, Senator Ernst, and then go over to you, Congressman Ryan. Caucuses. Now, I was a staffer, as Carrie mentioned, and caucuses were generally the place you go to demonstrate that you're doing something on issue, but really you're not doing much on the issue. You know, you look on the list and congressmen and senators will be on like 30 caucuses. Tell us why the Defense Modernization Caucus matters and isn't just a bullet point on one of those CVs. Senator Ernst.
Well, thank you. And as the co-founder of the Senate Motorcycle Caucus, we probably don't spend a lot of time visiting about, well, Gary Peters and I talk about our motorcycles a lot, but this particular caucus actually has not just wonderful form with the members that have joined the caucus, but we have function as well. And I am one of the more recent members. I joined earlier this year, but we're actually working on modernization efforts, and we collaborate on a lot of the steps necessary that will go into the National Defense Authorization Act. But I would just differentiate it in that it is actually a working caucus, unlike some of the others where they're more social of function. This actually is a working caucus.
Congressman Ryan, you're the co-founder of this caucus, and maybe no one gave you the memo that you're not supposed to have a caucus that actually requires the engagement, because you did it in your first term, and I was there actually when you announced the caucus. One of the things you said is that you want to do more and do better at working with innovative companies to partner. And of course, you served, and now, before coming to the Congress, you're actually working with innovative companies. Reflect a little bit about what you hope to see based on your experience, both as someone who was on the battlefield in terms of what modernization can deliver, as well as what you saw in the private sector that you need Congress to fully leverage and integrate in its work.
I just have to note for the record, too, the two Army people are on time, or relatively on time. The Navy is late. I had to say that. If I didn't say that, I would be disowned by my former service.
Thanks, you said it. I have to work with you.
Yeah. I can be that guy.
D on D violence right there. Okay.
Well, you came hot on the caucus, so you know. No, I think, yes, I'm so new to Congress that I thought you actually are supposed to do things in Congress. So Rob Whitman, who many of you know, and I think was going to try to join us but couldn't, actually came to me with the idea, so he gets the lion's share of the credit. And the idea was, I had worked in 2 defense tech companies after the Army, before Congress, and had just experienced massive frustration to the point, that we were essentially ready to give up on a mission that we loved and believed in because it was just so painful, as many in the room obviously know and experienced. So we wanted to create an actual functional place where companies or innovators that felt like they kind of had nowhere to go could come to us with very specific ideas and needs. We literally set up an easy to access web form for NDAA amendments, for places where there's friction or problems in the system, and it's worked. I mean, just in our first year, there he is. How are you, Senator? Good. You missed an Army-Navy tab. And just in our first year, we got pretty significant amendments through and passed on speeding up ATO, for example, giving a lot more hiring authorities to the DIU and other innovation entities to bring in the right kind of talent that we need, getting better access to SCIFs and cleared facilities for startups. So we're able to do that pretty quickly, and we want that input, and now in a bicameral way, to come from you all and from companies that felt like they didn't have a voice before. So we're encouraged by it.
All right, so the Modernization Caucus is not something that's limited, behind closed doors for members to discuss, but actually you're inviting general public and those from the industry and innovation sector to participate. Senator Kelly, I'll ask a general question, let you warm up a little bit. We'll go back to Senator Ernst, then go down the line. There's a really great opportunity right now to realize modernization goals. And I'll articulate maybe 3 or 4 of them, and then go down the line and ask each of you to respond and maybe pull the thread on 1 or 2 or all of them, how you see fit. Modernization gets bandied about a lot, right? But realizing it and seeing it integrated into the force is, of course, the huge challenge. 3 or 4 things going on. Number 1, Secretary of Defense Hegseth is talking about an 8% reallocation of the budget towards modernization efforts. It's a huge goal. Will do violence to a defense budget, but a great opportunity, I would think, from the standpoint of individuals thinking and prioritizing about modernization. Number 2, you have a reconciliation measure going through the Congress. The House passed, as you know, Congressman Ryan, I believe you voted in favor of it. A once-in-a-generation opportunity, $150 billion, right, going towards what is, for the most part, modernization priorities. Number 3, you have this year's budget request, which is flat at the top line. We don't know the details underneath. What happens underneath is hugely important. Is it going to be 1% towards modernization or a greater percentage? And then you have the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, respectively, saying that we're actually going to increase that top line request. So it's something between 4 to 5% real growth. All right, 3 big developments, all of which create, I think, opportunities for modernization. What should we be focusing on, and what would you like to see included? I hope you're warmed up, Senator Kelly, but we'll start with Senator Ernst and we'll go down the line.
Great. Okay. Yes, a lot going on in that question, Roger. Thank you so much. But as we move forward, of course, Secretary Hegseth did order that 8% cut basically across the board. So some will say, stop, what's going on? We really need to build up the appropriations for the Department of Defense. And while I agree with that, the squeal in me, I'm known for my squeal awards and what's now Doge, I was Doge before it was the cool thing. But finding fraud, waste, and abuse within the system. So I would say that 8% cut, it's a challenge, but I always say it's up to us to turn those challenges into opportunities. That 8% cut forces us to go back and ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse. The Department of Defense is the only department that has never passed an audit. Okay, so we need to go in, we need to scrutinize the way we have been spending at Department of Defense, and it provides us with an opportunity then to divest the things that aren't working or eliminate the money that we've spent that goes to absolutely nothing that furthers our national interests, our safety and security. So that's the opportunity. So building from that, though, as we go through reconciliation, if we are able to see that $150 billion plus up, it is a great opportunity to invest in modernization. Again, divesting of the old platforms that don't do us any good any longer, and focusing on modern warfare and where we need to go as a nation to remain competitive and push back against our adversaries. So I'm all about it. Some of the things I want to see, obviously, I lean in heavily from the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee, focusing on AI. Now, across the department, we know there's a lot of data systems out there that do not communicate. It's time to modernize that. We can do that through AI efforts. I look at other incoming capabilities, think about unmanned systems, a lot of that. But those are some of the initiatives I want to see. But bottom line, now's the time to get it right. We've got kind of this president who's providing shock and awe, and now's the time to take advantage of it. So let's do it.
Senator Ernst thinks 8% can be reallocated to modernization efforts, and she articulated some of the priorities. Congressman Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, the devil's always in the details. I think a big part of the reason I want to be on Armed Services Committee and frankly be in Congress is to be disruptive to the status quo that even 20 plus years ago, or almost 20 years ago when I was in uniform, we were getting handed frankly useless, garbage, overpriced tech systems and solutions that we knew in the field weren't needed, that even senior leaders knew weren't needed, but we kept forcing them through to the point that some of those providers literally had to sue the Army to actually have an open competition. And that's improved, but I think we need to push much, much harder. The Secretary of the Army, I give him credit, essentially said something like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see one of the big primes go away. I won't use the exact word that he used, it was a different word. I don't think that's wrong. I think we really need to be aggressive and shake it up. I'll probably never be invited to this forum again after saying that. But I really especially want to credit, I think the Army and General George have really had this right with the idea of this transformation and contact concept where let's go pilot some things in the field with maneuver units, see what works, and then use that to inform some pretty massive changes that they just rolled out, and that has already upset a lot of those institutional interests, I think mostly in a good way. And so then how do we scale that? And the last thing I just say, I do think in reconciliation, the direction was right in terms of where a lot of those investments were, specifically several $billion more in the innovation portfolio, building to scale a lot of the early pilots that the Defense Innovation Unit and other innovators have done. My only concern is what the heck is going on at the top of the Pentagon to have trust that they can actually execute the strategy. I think the strategy is right, but half the people that I thought were going to be doing it have essentially left, and that's something that I do think we have to grapple with, and frankly, Congress has to have some oversight on, so that's something else that I'm focused on.
All right, so you like some of the policy you're seeing, Secretary Driscoll's memo that Secretary Hegseth signed out recently, but you're concerned about execution on the side of the Pentagon leadership. Senator Kelly, welcome to the forum.
Well, thank you for having me. I also serve on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate with Senator Ernst, and the Chairman Wicker has expressed some concerns. We've been operating under a relatively flat budget because of the CR, and we haven't really seen even the increases because of inflation, and juicing this through reconciliation is not the best way to do this, right? We should have a regular process where if we've got priorities, let's say it's shipbuilding, which is one of my priorities. I spent 25 years in the United States Navy. I'm trying to fix this on the civilian side, which will help naval shipbuilding. But just that as an example is a place where we need kind of regular order and a regular budgetary process. Now, this one time through reconciliation, put some money, if we put it in the right places, that could be helpful. But what we have to get back to is get away from the CR. And then also look at completely modernizing the way we acquire things. This has been the same way we've done this over and over again every year since, probably go back to the 1960s. And I remember when I was at graduate school at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey, California, 1991, 92-ish, I got to take like one elective because of the program I was in, and I took a defense acquisition class, and I could not believe that this defense acquisition thing was more complicated than the partial differential equations class I had. I was like, really? Is this how we acquire stuff in the military? I was just over in Ukraine a couple months ago, and I was at a drone factory, underground drone factory. and just I even helped him make a drone, which was kind of fun. That's probably been used already. Hopefully, well, I'm not going to say where I hope it was used, but they iterate on a very, very rapid cycle. Yeah. Like, talk about days, maybe weeks, and we upgrade. Takes us, sometimes years to get new capabilities to the fleet, and as the congressman said, sometimes they're not the right capabilities. So we've got to do better. I'd like to see us get back to a regular process, and we got to make sure we have a budget that's increasing. Certainly, waste and abuse in the system in DoD. When you're talking about a budget that's approaching $1 trillion, there's a lot of waste in there. We've got to figure out where the waste is, and then try to apply that to modernizing our combat power. One thing I'm really concerned about is we often plan for what we think the next conflict is going to be. And right now we're planning for the Western Pacific, Indo-PACOM conflict with the Chinese. But history has shown that the war we prepare for is not the one we often find ourselves in. So I think we need to be aware of that. That conflict in Europe is certainly a possibility. We've seen incredible amount of innovation there by the Ukrainians. We need an army that can operate in the Western Pacific. That's a challenge for the army we have today. But I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that we currently have a conflict in Europe. We've got to be prepared there as well.
Senator Kelly, I'll just stick with you for a follow-up, and then we'll go back down the line here. But I like your formulation. We can't juice this through reconciliation. I think that's something effectively what you said, which I think is entirely correct. Reconciliation is this unique mechanism. Instead of having the one-year money or the two-year money, you have a number of years to use it, but it's not a replacement for the base budget. And of course, we're sitting here, it's May 13th, and I don't believe the Congress has received a budget beyond the top line. I guess two questions for you. We can go down the line. One, what is the appropriate top line? Certainly a CR you said is not sufficient. And you mentioned that not keeping the pace of inflation is insufficient. And then under the hood, right? So whatever number you get, how much of that should go to modernization? If you look at the new tech stuff, you could argue on the budget that's approaching $900 billion, maybe only 1% is going there. And if you're an optimist, you can somehow wedge in 3%. But given the amount of noise around it, it seems to me you're not getting the dollars to match it. Love your take, Senator.
Well, I think we need to come up with the top line based on requirements and where do we need to be able to position and apply our forces, and what does the force structure need to look like, and that should inform what the top line is. You talk about putting just 1% towards, I think, what you refer to as innovation. This is a question we always have. What kind of enduring capabilities do we want? What kind of new capabilities do we need? NGAD, F-47, I think, is a perfect example of something that I support. There are other folks out there, even very close to the administration, that thinks we should transition to robotic systems, to drones, to replace fighters. We don't control the electronic warfare environment in the way we would need to control it in order to have a robotic system operating against a peer adversary in the Western Pacific. It just doesn't. It's not the reality of the situation. So in my view, we still need a guy in the cockpit who, when things start to go wrong, could put a bomb on target. There are other priorities we have that are pretty huge. The president wants this Golden Dome, system to protect us from strategic nuclear weapons. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think we need to really think about what that system is and what it would do for deterrence, but also the effect it would have on the proliferation of nuclear weapons, from our adversaries. But that would take an incredible amount of innovation. We have systems now that, we've got interceptors. We hope they would work. Testing has shown they're not incredibly reliable. One final point.
Yeah.
If we want to innovate and get new systems out there and get small companies involved, we need to be able to test these systems. And one thing I saw that I really don't like is the cuts that are proposed for the testing ecosystem. And in my state, we have the electronic proving ground, we have the UMA proving ground. The infrastructure in places like that, and Edwards Air Force Base and Pax River, where I used to be based as a test pilot, it's typically starved of resources and it's not upgraded, and now they're talking about cuts. Well, it's hard to get and field new weapons and weapon systems when you don't have the ability to go through a robust developmental test process. And by starving those facilities, that's the situation we'll face.
Congressman Ryan, Senator Kelly did a nice job of showing the complexity of modernization and being a little more detailed in what we mean by that. On the one hand, you could talk about the new entrants, the new technology, the autonomous systems, and integration of AI. That's one form. But the other form is getting to that sixth generation fighter, for example, and the F-47. Also important. And if you jump a generation or generations, you leave yourself exposed. I mean, that's part of the discussion on legacy systems. How do you manage that as you think about modernization? Because, I think the F-47 is required and necessary, but at the same time, you want to go ahead and move into autonomy as quickly as we can. Is it an and?
I think it's an and, but it's a healthy tension and a balance. And I think certainly we've been much too heavily weighted towards overly engineered, too long, brittle systems which adversaries hack and steal and copy. We all know that story. We have to correct. Hopefully not overcorrect, but we clearly have to correct towards the much less sexy, high volume, attritable, whatever lingo you want to use. And if there's any lessons that I hope we are all taking from Ukraine in particular, but Israel and the Middle East as well, and really any conflict happening on the planet right now, is that we got to go back to those first principles, fundamentals of 155 howitzer shells, and not hundreds of thousands of dollar cost point drones, but hundreds of dollar cost point drones, and really fully marshaling the commercial power, which I know the previous panel talked about, of the country that's won us every major war we've fought in. And I just worry that it is fun and interesting and newsy to focus on the big shiny items. Golden Dome, no one has been able to describe to me what the heck it is. I mean, it sounds good in theory.
I think it's just going to be a little better than iron. I'm assuming that's how we got there.
It's all golden. It's all golden.
Yeah,
but,
yes.
And again, not opposed to it, but a small fraction of the money allocated in reconciliation, for example, towards Golden Dome, applied properly to those, scaling up what has been massively successful of commercial attritable unmanned platforms, would have a huge return for us downstream. And that, to me, is where we need to be pushing the emphasis.
Senator Ernst, you've led with the Innovative Act. Maybe you take a minute to talk about that, but I just wanted to frame it for a minute in the context of this conversation. We have all these new entrants that want to break in. They want to challenge the primes, maybe replace a prime, as we heard from the Secretary of the Army. There's also the thinking that, hey, the small businesses are the ones that have been almost the life stream, of the industrial base, and there's a lot of innovation there too. And the Small Business Innovation Research Program, was either something that people celebrate or feel no, it's just putting money into places that we can scale. Mm-hmm. How does the Innovative Act try to get at the role of small businesses in supporting our industrial base in the military, and what does that look like as modernized?
Yes, and thank you. I chair the Small Business Committee this year, and so I have a really unique opportunity to take what we're working on in small business and apply that to the modernization efforts on the Armed Services Committee. So we have SBIR, STTR. We know that they need to be reformed. And so my Innovate Act is actually reforming these programs at the Small Business Administration. So what we're starting with is really streamlining the application process so that we can get more of our small businesses involved in defense contracting. We have what will be new as breakthrough awards for those small businesses that meet the needs of the Department of Defense and our warfighters, but don't have the capital to really scale up. So we have different awards up to $30 million to enable those companies to do that. That's where we have a lot of fault. They just can't make it through that valley of death, you know. So how can we assist them along the way? We do that through those breakthrough awards. And then we also have to look at ways that these companies are not just using their technology for a very specific federal purpose at DOD, and it's exactly what Pat was talking about. We have to find dual purposes. So is there a commercial application for this product so that they are generating other streams of revenue as well? Instead of looking for these exquisite platforms that can only be used by the federal government, we want to know that there's another application. So I think about the drone technology that's out there right now. Well, how many folks are seeing applications of drones outside of the defense space? I see it in Iowa all the time. You know, our farmers are using drones for applying herbicide on very specific locations in their fields. So, I mean, there's just so many different applications, and when we really wrap our minds around it, that yes, there is a wartime purpose, but there's also purpose in another direction as well. And that way we're lowering the cost to the Department of Defense. We're helping another small business with outside applications. So the Innovate Act, I'm really excited about it. Hopefully we can get this over the finish line. It is badly needed to break out of what has become known as the SBIR mills that are out there, where so many small businesses, they're just applying for government money, and that's all they ever do is get government money to develop something that never actually goes to the warfighters or used for a commercial purpose. So we've got to break that habit and really get small businesses pushed forward.
Not a set aside, actually something that's going to be integrated and benefit the military, and of course, commercial application even better, it makes it more viable. You know, another aspect of modernization, we're talking about small business. Senator Kelly, I wonder if you can comment on legacy systems. I mean, oftentimes we're presented with this binary choice. We want to modernize, right? You got to give up the legacy platform. There's also the opportunity to modernize the legacy platform so you don't have this space where you have to give up capability today for a PowerPoint, right, that will give you a capability, pick how many years out into the future. I wonder, from your perch in the Senate Armed Services Committee, kind of what's the lens through you look at legacy systems and say, are we modernizing? Is it integrating artificial intelligence or other sorts of autonomous systems that you're putting on the ship or the fighter?
Well, the Deputy Secretary at Interior that's going to oversee reclamation and USGS, I was meeting with her in my office the other day, and her dad was a B-52 pilot. We were talking about B-52s.
Yep.
Because some of these systems we get incredible value out of. The last B-52 pilot might be flying an airplane that is approaching, not that specific airframe, but a system that's approaching 100 years old. I mean, it's quite remarkable when we get there. When you look at the out years for the B-52, we haven't been able to replace that capability. It's been incredible value. I would say the F-16, F-A-18, Abrams tank, still today, our adversaries' tanks can't match the Abrams. But sometimes we also get it wrong, and we've got to cancel systems pretty quickly because they didn't prove to be as effective as we thought they would be. Or even sometimes FARA, as an example, the Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, to replace the Kiowa is an example of a system that the Army thought, okay, do we really need this thing? We're looking at what's going on in Ukraine with these unmanned systems, with drones. We're going to spend billions and billions of dollars on this. They canceled it. I was supportive of that. Probably not a universal opinion. So we've got to constantly consider which legacy systems and enduring capabilities are the right ones, which ones do we need to get rid of. which is always a challenge because some member of Congress here is going to be supportive of that system. It's built in their district. I'll give you an example. On the other side of this is the AH-64 Apache. Right now we're upgrading some AH-64Ds to the E model. We've got allies of ours buying E models. Poland is buying 96. South Korea is buying 36 of them. When they see us shut down the line that transitions AH-64Ds to Es, they get a little bit concerned. Is this an enduring capability for the United States? Or maybe they're, gonna be moving on to something else. So I think the Apache is, in fact, something we're gonna have for years, maybe decades to come, because it is one of these systems that's been really effective. So it's constantly trying to figure out what's the need, what works for that, what's been great value to the taxpayer and what isn't.
Yeah, Congressman Ryan, as Senator Kelly was outlining the thinking in terms of how you evaluate legacy platforms or the modernization of legacy platforms, there had to be somebody in this room wearing jeans who identifies as a tech bro rolling their eyes, right? Because what do you mean? We're still going to be using an Abrams tank or a B-52?
Yes.
We're never going to modernize. We're never going to get where we need to be. That is 20th century warfare. We should need to be thinking about 21st century warfare. That's what I mean by modernization. Are we integrating enough of the tech world into the world of the primes? Meaning, should we not be thinking about, hey, let's replace a prime and have them become the dinosaur? Rather, should the primes be integrating and start buying up and integrating this new tech from these new companies? Is that the path we should go down?
Again, probably not a popular opinion. I don't think the current primes are the way forward. I think they've had that chance and do some good work, but have lost the innovation, incentive, and capacity in most cases at a macro level. And you see that. I mean, you talk to warfighters and you talk to combatant commanders, you talk to folks at the tactical edge, when they know what they want and what they need, and they largely want it from relatively newer disruptive companies for a bunch of reasons that most people in this room know. And again, I think we could debate specific platforms. I think the approach has to be. By
all means, I don't want to get away with that. Have at it.
No. I think the approach has to be particularly to trust the folks that have been serving for a few decades in uniform to have that vision and ask the hard questions. I do think I said some good things about the Army's plan. I do think they also really didn't consult very much with the Congress, which last time I read the Constitution is, still a thing that we're supposed to be doing. We haven't done much of that the last 100 and some days. But I do think it's very important that there is
400 plus hundreds, or 4 years and 100 plus. No, okay. If we're going to throw
I'm happy to have that debate. But point being, Congress, through multiple administrations, I'll concede that, needs to get our own act together, needs to have a more clear vision, needs to pass CRs on time, and there should be a more fulsome, small d democratic debate about these things going through the committee. So I think that's part of the process too that has to be said.
If I can
please jump in. Yeah, absolutely.
So I do large in part agree, and I love our tech bros, and I am all about technology and tech gals too. I'm all about moving forward. We have to, but at the end of the day too, I always go back to the fact that a soldier still needs to be a soldier and understand the basics of soldiering. So when we deployed, I deployed to Kuwait and Iraq in 2003 at the beginning of the Iraq War. It was just complete chaos. So, and there's probably some of you that might be in this room. I always find one or two. As a transportation company commander, I'm sorry, folks, we didn't even have maps to get us where we needed to go in Iraq. So literally, I had to go to another transportation company commander that had already driven the route up into Iraq. And he came over to our tent, because we were in tents, folks. This is not like, think modern warfare. It's all sterile and great. He came over to our tent, sat down with me, my first sergeant, and the leaders that were going to start taking the first convoys up into Iraq. And he pulls out his hand-drawn map. And we proceed to copy the hand-drawn map on a piece of paper to use for our drivers to go up to Baghdad International Airport. Now, mind you, I mean, it wasn't that difficult. All of the convoys were headed that direction. But we have to remember at the end of the day, you still got to be a soldier. You still got to know how to use a map and a compass and figure things out. So while technology is wonderful, Mark even brought it up, you know, the challenge of electronic warfare and having an environment that can push back against that. Systems can fail. And at the end of the day, if those systems fail, you still have to know how to complete the mission regardless of technology. So I am all about it. We've got to modernize, but training our men and women so that they can act and respond to the situation on the ground is extremely important.
And part of that, Senator, maybe this is, we'll get to a question from the audience in just a minute, but really a debate about what kind of force we want to have and you know, what our strategy is. So I'm going to go wonky here for a second on defense strategy, but a lot of these new technologies, and Senator, you referenced Ukraine, for example, you know, those technologies are organized and being used to repel a force, right? Essentially, it's a denial strategy and denial force. Look where Russia's investing, for example, which would be the leading example right now of a country that's seeking to use its military to advance, not just to repel, but to take territory. What does the United States want to be? Because if I had to delineate between the sort of capabilities, modernization, the highest end, or kind of the new tech stuff, it's far more on the denial end of the spectrum. But if you talk about Abrams tanks and B-52 bombers, right, and some of and aircraft carriers and other sorts, these are the things that actually allow you to take and hold. And that's a broader strategy discussion. Senator Kelly, I'd love to get your reaction to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is different. My personal experience in this was the Gulf War #1, where it wasn't defensive. We had to push the Iraqis out of Kuwait, push them back up into Iraq. We did it over about 6 weeks with an air campaign, and then just, a few days with maybe a week with a ground campaign very effectively. And I think that was a good example of maybe the first time in a while we were integrating new technology into the battlefield. Things like GPS and precision strike, laser-guided weapons that we use. We didn't have a lot of GPS weapons. They were just starting to come on board. I think we got to be able to do both. I mean, part of even a defensive strategy for us and our allies, just look at the defense of Taiwan. If we found ourselves in that conflict, we would have to potentially push the Chinese off of an island, which is not an easy thing to do. What kind of capability do we need for that? I think we've got a pretty good idea. One thing we would have to do is to be able to penetrate their A2AD bubble that they built around the island out, past the second island chain. That's going to present a big challenge, for us. But at the same time, when you're talking about, the ground combat, the Army systems that they need, well, if Ukraine is any indication, it means the Army is going to need a lot of drones, and the Marine Corps, and probably the Navy and the Air Force as well. I was in a hospital outside of Kyiv a couple months ago and met with about 10 injured Ukrainian veterans. These guys were amputees. One was blind and was a triple amputee. And with one exception, every one of them was attacked with an FPV, a drone. Yep. No artillery injuries, 0. One guy stepped on a landmine, lost both of his legs, but the rest of them were attacked. 9 out of 10 of them were hit by drones. So that's where the casualties are. So that's for the Ukrainians and the Russians, by the way. That's what currently works.
Let's get last words as we wrap up the panel. We'll go to the Congressman, then the Senator.
Just to go I agree with a lot of what Senator Kelly said. I think a slight slightly different direction that's important to say on really good question, Roger. I think you could go back even maybe as far as, you know.
That could be your last comment right there. That was perfect.
It's on the record. You could go back as far as like, you know, the end of the Cold War, and I think you talk to voters in my district. They don't feel like we have a direction right now. I think, you know, it feels like our defense budget keeps growing. A lot of us in this room understand why, but it does seem like we are kind of trying to do it all without the essence of strategy, which is knowing your ends you're aiming for and making hard decisions and prioritizing. And I think we failed for multiple presidencies and multiple decades to do that. I know people at this great organization think a lot about that, and other smart people are thinking about it. It's not for lack of trying. But I think if we don't really spend some time on that, and it's easy to get focused on the specific platforms, it's easy to get into the wonk of, you know, we need acquisition reform, which we do, we need all these things, but to what end? And I do think that Congress should spend some more time on that. So until we answer that question, to the heart of your question, I worry we just keep trying to do everything. We don't do anything exceptionally well, and our adversaries have made hard choices about what they want to do. So
I'm starting to get scared here because I'm seeing Dr. Hamry stare at me.
Yep, I'll stop.
But Senator Ernst, you get the last word.
Well, and thank you all for hosting us today, and I'm really so grateful that I have such good partners as well, both in the House and the Senate. And most of the time you will find those of us on the Armed Services Committee, we are pushing in the same direction. So I do agree. I think we have to be more strategic about what we are doing. We have to know what that end goal is. So I think that we are really working on these efforts to come to that conclusion. But I always come back to, you know, as a United States, why were we formed as a United States? Why do we have a federal government? And the primary reason the federal government was formed was for the common defense of our new nation. Common defense. And we forget that. And so as I put my Doge hat on too, you know, through federal government, through good times and bad, we've expanded programs out there so much so that we're doing a lot of things that the federal government really shouldn't do. We're expending a lot of money doing things the federal government shouldn't be doing. What we should be doing is focused on national security. And we all need to remember that. And we need to, now is the time we need to come back to that and focus on what are the priorities of our nation and securing our people. And I think through the modernization efforts, we can do that. We can watch the taxpayer dollars and get the biggest bang for the buck that we can. But we have to collaborate on this. There's going to be give and take along the way, but we have to be a safer, more secure nation.
Can I say 2 sentences?
You have to ask Dr. Hamry's permission behind you, but okay, he just said yes.
If you're not changing, you're getting worse. And I think that's true for DOD as much as any organization.
Senators, Congressmen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.